Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
It's the week ending Saturday, the 4th of November, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Joe Biden calling for a pause in the conflict between Israel and Hamas, the UK COVID inquiry exposing damning WhatsApp messages from inside Number 10, and tributes being paid to Friends star Matthew Perry, who's died at the age of 54. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. Joining me today from the Week's digital team is Harriet Marsden and Sorcha Bradley, and we welcome back comedian and journalist Suchandrika Chakrabarti, who I understand is shortly to be leveraging her punditry in a forthcoming comedy night.
That's right, it's called Good News, Bad News. It's on next Tuesday at Ace and Eights in Tufnell Park. We're going to have the acts bring in a news story from the last month and then make light of it.
What could go wrong?
We're going to be a little bit careful. I've asked them to be sensitive.
Yes. Have you given them any advice about where they can find some good news these days?
Oh, it doesn't have to be good news, but just be sure you can joke about it.
It's actually an interesting moment, I find, for satire. I noticed on both Have I Got News For You and Last Week Tonight, to be fair, in the first week of the Israel-Gaza story, but nonetheless, almost straight away, they actually said on air, we can't talk about this, it's too miserable, we can't make jokes about it.
So speaking of that, like when Putin invaded Ukraine, I was writing on the news quiz that week, and I'm writing on Have I Got News For You next week, so it's going to be tricky.
Okay, good. Well, a lady who's up for a challenge, as is Harriet. You're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is the world becoming more African?
The world itself is becoming more African, fast. Projections show that by 2050, Africa's current population of 1.4 billion will double. Throughout this vast continent, country after country is undergoing an enormous youth bulge.
Interesting to hear anyone say youth bulge with a straight face, but that was Gabrielle Sierra there on the Council of Foreign Relations podcast. The episode is How Will Africa's Population Boom Change the World? Harriet, what's the story? What's happened this week?
So the New York Times has published its first piece in a series about how this so-called youth bulge in Africa will affect the continent and will change the entire world in the coming decades. So this is the...
Let's go youth quake. That's the word they used,
It's a little bit, it's a little bit less dicey.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful piece, actually. It's by the chief Africa correspondent, Declan Walsh, with some really lovely photos from freelance photographer Hannah Reyes Morales. And there's just some amazing stats in there. The population of the continent is projected to nearly double over the next 25 years to 2.5 billion. So in 2050, they estimate that about a quarter of all of humanity will live in Africa. And that's a story of enormous progress in a short space of time, with halved infant mortality since 2000 and improved access to food and education. But it is also a story of huge, huge challenges and seismic shifts across the entire world in the coming decades.
And something that you think perhaps is being missed generally by the West?
I don't think it's being missed by the powers of the West. I mean, there are already the big powers, the US, China, Russia, India. They're all scrabbling for influence and political alliances and investment opportunities on the continent. So I don't think it's being missed where it matters. But I do think that the implications of this youth quake in Africa and the median age on the continent being so young. So most of the world's young population will live in Africa in the coming decades. It's going to have enormous implications for trade, politics, and culture around the world.
And jobs as well, Sorcha. Here's a quote that I picked out from the article. After climate change, Africa's jobs crisis will be a defining challenge of our era.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the flip side to population explosion is that it also leads to mass unemployment. At the moment in South Africa, which is one of the most industrialized nations on the continent, unemployment is at 35%. And, lack of opportunity leads to things, well, it leads to migration for one. In Europe, that is obviously already having a huge political fallout and has been for many years. And also, it can drive quite violent discontent and has done in several West African countries. We are seeing military coups and we are seeing some young people turn to terrorist groups. And yeah, if you have a lot of young unemployed people, then that can lead to more extremism and more violence.
Yes, and then there is the climate change issue, Suchandrika, which was also mentioned in that quote there. The piece said something along the lines of, the average African uses the same amount of energy per year as an American refrigerator. So it's essentially saying, there's a lot of people on that continent that have not contributed to the climate emergency to the same degree that we have, and yet they're still going to have to cope with the repercussions.
Yeah, I was just reading a blog from the International Monetary Fund, and they say that climate change poses grave threats to countries across Africa. So you've got this looming problem that's disproportionately going to affect Africans while you have this kind of youth quake. And they call the states that are going to be affected conflict-affected fragile states. So from the Central African Republic to Somalia and Sudan, these fragile states suffer more from the floods, the droughts, the storms, like all of this extreme weather and all the effects it has on the population. And then each year, 3 times more people are affected by natural disasters in these fragile states than in other countries. So they're going to be affected to a much larger degree than we are here over in the UK and in other countries like that, even though we contributed more. And these disasters in fragile states will displace more than twice the share of the population than in other countries. So there's a great success story here and there's a lot of positivity. We also have to wonder, what does that future look like? And if you were one of these young people, would you look for your future to be somewhere else? Would you look to travel maybe permanently or less permanently? But it is quite a scary thing on the horizon, and it does kind of dampen our joy at this kind of young, exciting, energetic population that has like tech skills, that has a hunger to be part of the world stage. And you just kind of think, but what is the country actually going to look like for them?
Well, let's talk about that geopolitical world stage, Harriet, because they have a rival, don't they, in Africa to the European Union. There is a sense that, I suppose, some of the nations that were regarded by the West as sort of, tin pot, you don't have to talk to them, doesn't matter, they'll help you if you can. Those are now important countries to deal with. And that's definitely the sort of direction of travel.
Absolutely. Africa, I mean, it's so many countries, isn't it? It's
yeah, I mean, it's worth saying we keep saying Africa like it's one place. It's a very disparate continent, obviously.
It's in no way homogenous. It's 54 countries, thousands and thousands of cultures, and between 1,000 and 2,000 languages spoken. That's a third of the world's languages. So there's all these different shifting allegiances and histories and nationalities that have implications for geopolitics and for trade. And the African Union has now become basically is of equal standing to the European Union.
Yeah, so the implications are because they've matured, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reserves of natural resources all over the continent are astonishing. The minerals that are needed, as Suchandrika was saying, for the future of the battle against the climate crisis. I think Africa has something like 60% of the world's solar energy potential and 70% of its cobalt resources, which we need for electronic vehicles. The African Union joined G20 in September, so that puts it on par with the European Union and is pursuing a future of more borderless travel on the continent. So yes, there has in the past been this tendency to kind of dismiss or overlook both the potential and the importance of these countries. But that I think is rapidly changing, particularly as big kind of rogue states now like Russia and Iran and China as well all pursue influence all across the continent.
And what about in terms of culture, Sorcha? Are we going to see a kind of slow burn African takeover of global culture? I mean, Afrobeats obviously is a big thing. But what about in art and literature and elsewhere?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most interesting things about this story is that, I guess, in the West, our view of Africa is changing as a whole. And I think people have quite a negative sort of view historically of Africa, of, how they think of the countries in Africa. But that is beginning to totally change with sort of, as we have these young artists, coming through and becoming more popular. And yeah, West African music is absolutely enormous in pop music across the globe at the moment. Burna Boy is one of the biggest stars right now. Afrobeats songs streamed over 13 billion times on Spotify. And it's not just in, terms of music, paying a lot more attention to African architects. Africa is the focus of the Biennale this year. We've had Tanzanian Nobel Prize winners in literature. So, African culture and of these individual nations is being massively exported to the world and is totally changing how we view the continent.
Is that a demographic thing slightly as well, though, Suchandrika? When Sorcha says West African music is massive, I mean, it certainly is, but I sort of suspect mostly with the under 40s around the world. I mean, there aren't many West African records being played on radio too.
Yet.
Exactly. Well, what we're looking at is something called the demographic dividend, which happens when you have an increasing number of young people, and what will eventually sort of tick into place is declining fertility when that generation of young people don't immediately go into having large numbers of children themselves. And it's something that happened in East Asia, mostly in China in the 20th century. So it does sort of position the continent as a possible world player on stage, as a possibly kind of booming economy, and a place where culture can really thrive because financially the countries are doing well within the continent. But I will say I do have to keep going back to climate change, because for the countries within Africa to do well, all of them will have different levels of how they're affected by climate change. But by 2040, fragile states could face 61 days a year of temperatures above 35 degrees Celsius. Like, I'm gone at about 21, so I don't know how anyone deals with that. And that is 4 times more than other countries. So again, like, bringing it back to Africa, like the actual landscape, how is that going to be changed across all the different countries? And how is that going to affect the people who live there, and will they want to stay? So extreme heat, along with other more frequent extreme weather events that come with it, that endanger human health, and if we're going to be pragmatic and a bit cold about it, also affects jobs in key sectors such as agriculture and construction. What's going to happen to those? And it makes me wonder if that culture coming out of Africa will actually end up coming out of other places in the world as people kind of tally up what their future looks like and thinks, maybe this isn't it. So I do wonder if the trends we've seen economically that have already happened in the UK, that have been happening in Asia, they didn't have this kind of very intense climate change factor. And so will that kind of change the trajectory, and perhaps it's harder for us to predict what Africa's going to look like.
But also, Harriet, in many African nations, there's an issue around the competence of their own governments and corruption. I mean, that's something that's plagued the continent for decades, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this is a really, really, really big and maybe undervalued part of this story, that although the median age in Africa at the moment is 19, it's the average age of the leader is 63. It's 63. This is a continent of very young, very many unemployed, lack of opportunity young people being run by very old men who have been clinging on to power in many, many countries for decades. So there's this increasing instability in that. We've talked before on this podcast about the problems of gentocracy and dissatisfaction among the youth and feeling politically basically unheard and unrepresented. So that's really part of the reason that we've seen this lack of opportunity coupled with this anti-democracy basically driving all these military coups all over West Africa in the last 2 years. So it's a really big, important part of the puzzle to think about that as, yes, it's a very young continent, but the power is largely in the hands of very few, very old men. But just to pick up on your point about music and Afrobeats and it maybe being a bit more for the under 40s, we haven't talked about food. I mean, Ethiopian food, Eritrean food, Nigerian food, these are huge, huge, huge trends now. Johannesburg is considered to be one of the big melting pots of African cuisine now. And then we've got Moroccan architecture, Nigerian fantasy literature. It's not all for young people.
That's true. I suspect it's a bigger deal where you live, Harriet, than where I live, but it is coming out, isn't it, slowly across the country. In the meantime, if you do want to see some African art, I do believe Nando's has some. I hope that we'll be getting some Ethiopian cuisine a little bit sooner than that. Suchandrika, you're up next after this.
Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
Okay, so Chandrika, you're up next. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Thought it was impossible to U-turn on a train? Think again.
My granddad, who owns an Nokia brick, very stubborn, doesn't really like to ask for help with his tickets because he knows. But obviously, he can't see the ticket machine. A lot of my friends who are around my age don't travel on train a lot. They always don't know what ticket to get. So they rely on the ticket offices. And when they're gone, I'm going to end up doing that job. So it's very much a case of nobody's winning regardless of age. But also they keep a lot of vulnerable people safe, like myself. I'm disabled, and also a lot of lone women and girls, as I've witnessed multiple domestic violence incidents on trains. And sometimes if ticket office staff aren't there when the train finishes its route, it's nasty.
Yeah, it's not just about selling tickets.
It's about safety.
Yeah, it's about safety, it's about presence, and it's about having somebody there.
Train passenger Susie talking to YouTuber Jen on the Move in their video, The Biggest Loss to the Railway in Decades. So Chandrika, what was being considered the biggest loss to the railway in decades, and what's happened this week?
The loss of ticket offices at railway stations across the country. So basically, the government has cancelled rail industry plans for the mass closure of ticket offices in England, and they said they failed to reach the high threshold of serving passengers. So the Rail Delivery Group, the RDG, announced over the summer it intended to shut almost all of the 1,007 train station ticket offices in an attempt to reduce costs after COVID. And ministers had originally backed this proposal, despite concerns from unions and charities of the impact on vulnerable people.
And now they've changed their mind.
Yes, this week Transport Secretary Mark Harper confirmed he'd asked train operators to withdraw their proposals following a public consultation. And one of our favourite General Secretary of Unions, of course, Mick Lynch. So the decision was a resounding victory for the campaign against the closures.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned ministers speaking in support of ticket closures. Not just ministers, but the Prime Minister said in September that closing ticket offices was, quote, the right thing for the British public and British taxpayers because, he said, quote, only 1 in 10 tickets are sold currently in ticket offices. That was the argument being put forward by the Prime Minister.
I mean, it's really tough for our Prime Minister to really see what's going on from his helicopter. So he was trying to get rid of return tickets. Like, bless you, Rishi. There are so many layers to this, so many people who'd be affected, and it's all vulnerable sectors of the society. So disabled people, first of all, without people staffing the ticket offices, staffing the stations, it is so difficult for a wheelchair user or people with reduced mobility that might not be obvious at first to get on a train, to get off, to have their mobility aids stored safely. It's really important we have actual people on station. And then a couple of weeks ago, I read a story about a woman called Sarah Lagarde in the Financial Times. She had been run over by an underground train. So basically she'd fallen asleep on the tube, unfortunately, woken up, and she'd slipped under the tube and was run over twice. And there'd been lots of failures. There had been drivers who had missed seeing her and so on. And she lost an...
Well, how would a ticket office staff have made a difference to that?
Well, if there were more staff on the station, including the ticket office, it's more likely she would have been seen before she lost an arm and a leg to being run over twice. So she's been part of the campaign to stop these ticket closures.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it, Harriet? The Rail Delivery Group were saying, and obviously opponents of the plan have said, well, they were just flat out lying, but they were saying that they were moving staff from behind the glass in the ticket offices. So in that kind of scenario, there would be staff there to help someone who's fallen between the train and the platform. They weren't saying we get rid of staff. They were saying we don't need them in ticket offices anymore.
Yeah, which I don't believe for 1 second. I have to say, unlike the woman that we heard in the video, I do take a lot of trains. I take trains around the country most weekends. I take the tube twice a day. And I genuinely do believe that most of the ticket offices are not staffed at the moment. 1 in 50 journeys do I see a member of staff either in the ticket office or on the platform. With train stations, even less. And the reason that so many tickets, I believe, are sold on apps or digitally speaking is because most of the time there is no one to buy them from anyway. The story of the U-turn of being sold as some kind of saving win, it's not telling the full story. And I know that this is meant to be a more lighthearted story, and it is a good thing. And I do think it's a positive thing that there has been this U-turn, but the situation that we have in train stations and tube stations, the lack of staff, the lack of help, the lack of anybody in any emergency situation is already dire.
I don't, just to add to what Harriet said, train tickets are more expensive on the day now as well, so you're more likely to buy a month in advance, so that puts you off going to the ticket office, and it just feeds into this narrative of, well, ticket offices aren't needed. Well, no, we'd be out of pocket if we always bought on the day.
But these points had been made, Sorcha, since the announcement was made. They've been made all across local radio, they've been made in newspaper columns, they've been made by charities and disabled groups, and the government was quite prepared to carry on. What do you think changed?
Well, I think the government sort of spied quite an easy win for itself, in U-turning on this, especially after they've cancelled HS2. There's been, strikes over staffing levels and, safety on platforms, just seemingly unending industrial action. People are in the UK are feeling very negatively about, our railways and our country's infrastructure. I think they were envisioning the headlines, that would have rightly, I think, sort of come from scrapping these ticket offices and making the staffing crisis in railways even worse, potentially. So, yeah, I think it was an easy win. On the flip side, I do, sort of see the argument for reform. Only 12% of tickets are bought at the station. And I think if there was sort of a clear kind of, commitment put in place that, it wasn't going to be about staffing levels, there would still be staff at the stations and, sort of ticket, ways to buy tickets would, be accessible, then I think people, would be more open to it. But I think just blanket closing all the ticket offices is obviously, it has huge accessibility and safety issues there.
Suchandrika, it's also a victory, really, not for the sort of strikes and the lynch characters that you were mentioning earlier, but in a way just for the power of the pen. 750,000 people participated in the consultation about this, more than 99% of whom objected to the closures. There were only 2,045 people who wrote in support. I mean, it's a sort of quiet contribution to the public saying, you've definitely got this wrong. This is not what we want.
Yeah, it feels good in an era of like our rights of protest and everything kind of being eroded. But you know what? I think everyone kind of has a story, right? Like I grew up in sort of Zone 6, so near the end of what's now called the Elizabeth Line, but was First Great Eastern back then. And you have people falling over, drunk people. I've been followed. And what I'd say is there's not necessarily someone on the platform immediately you can go to, but you know where the ticket office is and you can go there. And I've had people sort of say, right, just come in the door, just stand here and wait, and sort of supported me when I felt a bit unsafe. And to take those people away will make a lot of us feel really, really unsafe, particularly young people, people living in rural areas, people living near the end of the line. It puts people in danger, and I think we're all aware of that. And I really love that people came together and said, no, we are not moving on this. Like, it's obviously a bad idea.
But is there a lesson there, Harriet, do you think, that you can apply across other political issues? If you do get enough people together, it is possible to change government policy.
No. Not really.
Why?
I'm sorry. I know.
Don't be sorry. I'm asking you the question.
Maybe too. No, I don't believe that at all. I am 100% with Sorcha on this. I think it was an easy win that basically didn't really cost anything, considering how much the staffing had already been eroded anyway. So no, I don't. I mean, we've seen, as Suchandrika said, we've seen our rights to protest publicly being completely decimated in the last 2 years. There is no petition online now that cannot reach the required threshold to be debated in the Commons pretty easily within like 24 hours now. So no, but I do think it's interesting just picking up what Sorcha said about reform and how, yes, it is important that we reform and industrialize and we automate processes. But I think it's interesting that we are supposed to buy a train ticket on our phones and we are supposed to do this all digitally. But when it comes to that train, inevitably, and I mean inevitably, being cancelled, delayed, or otherwise buggered, we have to go and apply for a refund and get, like, after rounds and rounds of applications, we maybe get a check in the post from the train company. So I'm like, why should we reform? I mean, why should we reform when they won't? They can't keep saying they're going to do away with ticket offices and then you can't actually, you can't get it automated on the way back. It's a bit of not not very quid pro quo, is it?
Yeah. And also, so much of the technology doesn't actually even work. The barriers don't work, the ticket machines don't work, et cetera, et cetera. So, we're sort of relying on this sort of fully automated system that literally does not work yet. So if we could get to that point, then maybe people would feel better about it.
Well, that's it. So let's just play devil's advocate for a minute, because, clearly the vast majority of people would prefer to speak to a human being. There are issues with disabled people, vulnerable groups, etc. And just in general, customer service at the moment is better provided by a person than a robot, regardless of whether you think that person deserves employment. However, AI is moving fast, isn't it? We've seen a government summit about that this week. It's quite conceivable that in, say, 20 years' time, the robot will be able to understand more efficiently and give me what I want more quickly than the human being, and there'll be 20 of them rather than one person there.
Okay,
and I'll be able to say, I need the cheapest ticket to go from here to here. Can I have it, please?
Can I just ask, have you been to the supermarket recently? Do you think self-service is more efficient? Do you think those self-service checkouts are more efficient than a human being?
But I'm not arguing that. I'm saying in 20 years'
They've
time.
led to a massive rise of shoplifting. So
the thing is, if you close your mind to the possibility that the computers could evolve to do it more efficiently than a human, are you possibly shooting the trains in the foot? That's all.
Well, you're asking for like several different things. So I don't think a robot or a computer could help someone who feels like they're being followed, for instance. No, a robot can't do that. So you're asking these staff members to do lots of different things. Part of their job can be automated possibly in the future. Yes. What is the cheapest way to get to Sunderland? Well, there's lots of different ways you can get around the system and get a cheap ticket. Fine. But I'm completely lost. A 5-year-old who's lost. The robot is not going to be great. So what is it that needs the human touch? Well, quite a lot of this job. Which parts of it can be automated? Some of it, can it be done well? Without privatised railways? No, all right now, no.
Okay, Sorcha, you're up next after this. Sorcha, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Can Spain's Gen Z princess save the monarchy?
Spain's it girl is turning 18 and the internet is obsessed. Princess Leonor of Asturias has sworn allegiance to the constitution on her birthday to make her eligible as the country's queen. She's heir to the throne and already has a reigning presence on social media, with some calling the storm of interest around her Leonor mania. And despite not having an official account herself, the hashtag Princess Leonor has 11 billion views on TikTok. Who is she and what's her role within the Spanish royals?
A breathless young reporter there on TikTok channel The News Movement on Wednesday. Sorcha, who is she so excited about and what's happened this week?
Yes, so this is Spain's Princess Leonor, the daughter of Spain's King Felipe VI and Queen Letizia. And she's turned 18 after a life of relative obscurity in Spain, away from the public eye. But now she's suddenly become an extremely public figure as Spain's future monarch, and actually the first queen in the modern era of Spain's monarchy. And she's in the news at the moment because she has just pledged her allegiance to the Spanish Constitution in a special ceremony that took place in Spain.
An entirely uncontroversial move for a future queen. Yes.
Yeah.
So why is this interesting? Why have people found it exciting?
Well, firstly, it is, some people do find this ceremony controversial because there are lots of Republican movements and government ministers in the Spanish government who object to the idea of monarchy overall. And, Spain's monarchy is not, I would say, it hasn't, covered itself in glory. Its former king, Juan Carlos, so Princess Leonora's grandfather, had to abdicate in 2014 after essentially a financial scandal. So that's dominated the headlines for many years in Spain. She is sort of basically the Spanish monarchy's savior, the monarchy is hoping. And she is very popular in Spain, at least on the internet, at least if you go on TikTok, where if you click on the hashtag Princess Leonor, that has been viewed 11 billion times.
Yes, a phenomenon that's been called Leonormania.
Yes. And I think, in lots of ways, it's obvious why. She is clearly very beautiful. She looks sort of, in your imagination, what you imagine a princess to be like. She looks like that. She's young, she's glamorous, she's clearly quite intelligent and charming.
She has yet to say anything.
Sometimes that's the wisest move, I think.
Yes.
And she's also very much been primed, to be the perfect princess. Because as we say, Spain's monarchy is quite controversial and basically can't afford to have any more scandals.
Has this crossed your radar, Suchandrika? Leonor mania? You're on social media a lot.
No. Soz, babe.
So actually, this is it. Harriet, is this just a sort of social media trend that's perhaps of interest to people who already like princesses, and actually it's not going to really change? We're talking about stories that change the world for all of us and have repercussions. What are the repercussions?
I don't know about this. Okay, so I have to say something about Spain's royal family. I don't think that they have been out of the news in Spain for the last 6 years. I mean, Sorcha, you mentioned that he had to abdicate because of a financial scandal. I think that's underselling it massively. Juan Carlos has been
underselling it.
Plagued with scandals. He abdicated to his son Felipe in 2014, but he had to go into exile in 2020 because he was becoming such an embarrassment to the family.
In Abu Dhabi, right?
Now in Abu Dhabi. And he is...
Just likes water parks, I've heard.
He likes a lot of water things, that's for sure. I would also question the timing of all this so-called Leonor mania. Like, call me a skeptic, if you will, but the case brought against the former king, who's her grandfather, Juan Carlos, brought by his ex-lover, was thrown out by the High Court in England just earlier this month. Now, this is a very, very, very exceptionally weird case. It wasn't that the case was dismissed, it just can't be heard in England. But she's claimed a lot of really ugly stuff against him, from harassment to death threats. There's also been a very bombshell book out about claiming that he might have had a secret child. So this is absolutely not a story.
You're making it sound, though, Harriet, like we don't have similar issues in our royal family, right?
I do think, though, that we have never had a member of our royal family who it was claimed, I have to stress this was never proven, but it was claimed that his Secret Service had to inject him with testosterone blockers and female hormones because his libido was becoming a threat to national security.
Okay, but we have, Sorcha, in this country, just off the top of my head, had members of the royal family consorting with Adolf Hitler. We've had members of the royal family alleged to be part of a paedophile ring. We have, as a country, managed to overcome quite a lot of controversy around our royal family in exactly this MO, right? Groom the young ones, make them seem like the next big thing, and then put them on the throne, and everyone loves them if they don't say anything. I mean, that is the template they're following, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. I would say, I was actually looking up who the most popular royals are in the UK. The first is still the Queen, and the second is Catherine.
The Queen as in Queen Elizabeth II,
as in
not the
Queen
current
Elizabeth
Queen.
II, sorry, yes. Yeah. And, the second most popular royal is the Princess of Wales, Catherine Middleton. Yeah, we totally rely on young, glamorous women who don't really say anything to boost the monarchy. Charles, I think, is sixth. He's not very popular at all. And so to sort of keep the institution going, we sort of bring in quote unquote commoners. And then those people are really elevated in the media, for good or for bad. I also think the other thing, which is like actually a serious point in Spain, is that Juan Carlos, we shouldn't forget, was installed by Spain's last dictator, Franco. And lots of Spanish people see the monarchy as sort of, the last remnants of this terrible period in Spanish history. And so therefore, are very, very strongly against it, I think in ways that we can't really understand in the UK because, we haven't been under a dictatorship.
But that's why they're learning from us, isn't it? That's why they've looked at our playbook, surely.
Yeah, I think so. I think, if you can make everyone forget about your, dark, nefarious, violent past and present, a young, beautiful, sort of blank slate queen, that's sort of the only kind of play they really have. And I think they've been given sort of a great hand in that regard.
Okay, so that's what Spain can maybe learn from us, Suchandrika. What about what we can possibly learn from Leonor? Because, I mean, you do look at the British royal family. We don't have one of those blank slate princesses anymore. Catherine is now over 40. If you're interested in that kind of Disney princess mold, who do we have to rival that?
She's still a blank slate, though.
Well,
Not any less blank.
Well, the point is, the Disney princess vibes are fading. I know I sound like a terrible misogynist here, but the point is she's getting older. She's not 18. That's the point I'm making. Who is there? There's like Fergie's daughters, isn't there? Like, do you think we have an issue in this country looking around for this kind of glamour that we can sprinkle on our family?
I don't think our royal family actually shines when it comes to glamour. I think our royal family just does a scandal so well.
Does it though? I mean, compared to the Spanish royal family, we've got toe sucking, they've got elephant shooting and mistresses.
I don't mean like which one we would enjoy personally, but I mean like when it comes to reading about it in the press, because that's what a royal family is. They're just a living soap opera.
That's not true in Spain. I mean, they are very, very, very powerful in terms of the government. And that I think is the biggest story here, is that there's these two warring unities in Spain at the moment. There's this very strong, but still kind of half and half republicanism versus pro-monarchy. But the biggest source of tension in Spain, politically speaking, is separatism versus unity. So the question of Spain as a whole, or Spain as separate regions like Catalonia, like Galicia, like the Basque Country. And obviously Spain is still locked in a political stalemate. I mean, we're 4 months out from the general election. There's still no government. It was like 100,000 people protesting in Madrid a couple of weeks ago against the current acting prime minister, who has kind of made these concessions towards Spanish separatists, to Catalan separatists. And the king, who is Leonor's father, has spoken out in favor of that. So you've got, on the one hand, the political institution, which has battled with all this separatism and this republicanism. And then you've got the monarchy and Spanish unity and what that represents on the other side. So it's not just about this Princess Diaries, young, beautiful blonde that the press will chew up and spit out. It's the question of what Spain is.
Yeah, but it's what Spain is for a younger demographic as well, isn't it, Sorcha? Which is interesting, because you might think, generally speaking, younger people are more likely to be Republican. But I suppose the point of having someone relatable to a younger generation is that might help buck the trend.
Yes, absolutely. I think young Spanish people totally support democracy. But I think similarly to in the UK, we're happy to have a royal family as long as they are not particularly involved in our, domestic politics, as long as they essentially have a ceremonial role. They're up there, they look good, they're ambassadors for our country, and sort of, no further than that. And that sort of looks like to be the role that Princess Leonor will play.
And I wonder if it is kind of a challenge to the UK royal family, Suchandrika, the fact that someone else is winning a PR battle, is the sort of global media dominance of all the terms around royalty are one of the things that Britain does, isn't it?
I suppose so. It's which one can keep the readers and the audience, keep their attention trained on them. But I feel like the people who are following Leonor Mania are perhaps only seeing the image and not thinking about what that monarchy represents. It's kind of one-dimensional, and it does feel like possibly quite a canny PR move. And yeah, I don't know. I think it will end as quickly as it started, sadly, and it might not be nice for her.
And Harriet, we can sort of claim Leonor for ourselves, can't we, though? Because she went to school in Wales.
She did. She studied in what's called the hippie Hogwarts as a school in Wales, because it's very beautiful old building with extremely liberal values. So she has managed to remain quite well out of the public eye. That is, of course, about to change. And I think that if we talk about whether or not the Spanish royal family is winning the PR battle, they might be at the moment, but it is a battle that will last her entire life. So it's not one that she can ever win.
Do you agree, Sorcha? Or do you think Leonor could become a household name in the rest of the world?
I do sort of agree. I think that if I was being extremely cynical, I think this is sort of a well-designed PR push. It's very easy to be popular when you've not really done or said anything. But at the same time, Americans love the idea of princesses. They love that. They kind of really, I would say, really buy into that kind of thing. And so with this increased social media reach, the popularity of TikTok, and sort of our increasingly sort of like image-based culture, I think, she probably will stay in the public eye for a really long time. Whether or not she can stay popular when she is actually a queen, that is a completely different question. That that remains to be seen.
Well, one thing that we can compare to the UK royal family is that the Spanish monarchy is very, very, very cheap. The Spanish monarchy is one of the lowest public expenditures in Europe. I think that Princess Leonor's earrings maybe cost more than the royal family's public expenditure budget for the year.
Which is what? Do you have the details?
Yep. The official figure, as of 2021, the official budget for the Spanish monarchy is 8.4 million euros. Like, there are other bits and pieces, different governments fund different bits, but that's the official public expenditure.
There you go. I think they prefer the word value than cheap. But thank you for pointing it out. And my thanks to our extravagant gallery of glamorous princesses, Harriet, Suchandrika and Sorcha. You can follow this show for free. That's good value. And get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tapping follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer for the last time for now was the appropriately monarchically named Sophie King, with support from Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.